What of women in all of this? Not anatomical women, of course. What are you thinking? Not anatomical women. Or at least not necessarily anatomical women, but instead those who enjoy according to Lacan's notion of feminine subjectivity. Don't forget how all of this is ramping up, my friends. We've been talking about the masculine side of things. We're shifting now to the feminine side. But this rule, one rule, applies to both here. Masculine and feminine. For Lacan, these are subject positions. They ain't swimsuit zones. It's about positionality, not anatomy. And all around questions of enjoyment. The questions at stake in Lacan's formulas of sexuation are all questions of enjoyment. How do you enjoy? Well, there's a masculine way that men and women often enjoy. There's a feminine way that men and women sometimes enjoy as well. Lacan's point is that it's about enjoyment. You can have a penis and enjoy according to feminine subjectivity. You can have a vulva and enjoy according to masculine subjectivity. It ain't got nothing to do with anatomy. I can't emphasize that enough, in particular because we keep using statements like men and women, blah, 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 masculine and feminine, blah, 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 blah. You have to bear in mind, though, that these are positions that any body can occupy, determined, of course, by how they enjoy. If masculine subjects enjoy by reducing their partners to parts that allow them to continue fantasizing about wholeness, singularity, and autonomy, feminine subjects enjoy, in part, these very reductions, or so often they're told, in patriarchal, by which I mean misogynist, societies like ours. Now, don't take this the wrong way. The West is still patriarchal. And what I see when I look out in my world, and don't forget, I live in San Francisco, California. This ain't exactly the middle of the United States. This ain't exactly Alabama. This ain't exactly Louisiana. But I look out and I see a lot of the exact same shit. I see masculinity turned toxic. I see patriarchy turned misogynist. Even in this beloved left coast city of San Francisco, I see these things. Let me try and be clear on how this works with the statements you've heard from me before. In this world of patriarchal, misogynistic culture where women are told to be the parts that help men feel whole, what we see is a certain pedagogy. Women are taught to be what men are taught to have. And when you get right down to it, this is also how the phallic function plays out. Men are taught that they are nothing without having the phallus. And women are taught that they are nothing without being it, without being a phallus to be had and held till death do you part, so help you God. Amen. Baby Jesus, Zeus's beard. You get the idea. You got to have a divine signature at the end of that shit. Women are taught to be what men are taught to have. Together, these masculine and feminine criteria and constraints, think limit conditions, function as the multifaceted limit condition of phallic enjoyment. Thankfully, as we're about to see, this isn't the only way to enjoy that is accessible to us humans. Do you know how to diagram this one? I think you do. And you know why I think you do know how to diagram this? Is because you've seen in Lacanian scholarship various Euler circles brought together in describing obsessional neurosis and its hysterical counterpart. Masculine having fantasies about having the phallus, they closely resemble the Euler circles of obsessional neurosis that folks like Bruce Fink have made such good use of. And I'm going to draw them out here just so you can see these things. You take two circles. If you're just listening, maybe you're on the road, maybe you're sitting on the bus, maybe you don't have a pen and paper handy. If you're watching, I can show you what we've got here. You take two circles, you draw one overlapping with the other, thereby creating three spaces. In the circle on the left, just put an M for masculine. In the circle on the right, put an F for feminine. Or if you prefer your men and women, you can M and W that shit. Doesn't matter. In the middle, write the classic Lacanian little a, so that you have a circle that looks like this, right next to another one. And in between, they've got this objet A. These Euler circles in this Euler diagram can be shown to be obsessional, and in this case masculine, by simply crossing out the circle on the right. You have an M circle for masculine, but the circle that overlaps with it is crossed out, leaving only the part of that circle which intersects with the masculine one. You've seen this before, so you may not even need to see the diagram that I'm holding up to you, but the way we read it as, relative to this masculinity bit, here what you see is a masculine partner reducing their lover, their spouse, their girlfriend, their boyfriend, whatever, to a part, to a pile of parts. Parts that are there to make the masculine subject feel whole. That's why the other circle is crossed out. All that matters to the masculine subject is the part of their partner that makes their circle seem complete. Do you see? See how this works? You could flip that shit around for the feminine side of things, for the hysteric, using similar Euler circles, and arrive at a very similar realization. Feminine fantasies of being something to be had by masculine subjects, they recall the Euler circles of hysteria. So to illustrate this, I'm going to draw two more Euler circles right next to each other, two circles that overlap, creating an intersectional zone. And I'm going to relabel them here with the feminine side on the left to tell you that that's the subject here, and with the masculine side on the right to tell you that's the other. And I'm going to leave that little a in between, just as you saw in the first diagram. You have a feminine subject in relation to a masculine subject, and between them in this intersectional space where their circles overlap, this objet A, which is object as much as cause. What we do here to make this into a diagram of hysteria in the clinical sense is we cross out again the feminine side of things, such that you now have the feminine circle, the circle of the subject on the left, x'd out. Here what you see is someone allowing themselves to be reduced to a part that allows their intimate other to feel whole. Now, in the case of hysteria, it's kind of complicated because what you see is the feminine subject reducing themselves to the cause of another's desire and then denying that other access to this objet A. The hysteric is happy to be the cause of your desire, but it does not want to be the object of your desire's fulfillment. That's why hysteria so often, as we've learned in these series, amounts to playing hard to get. It's a tough one. It's a tough position to be in. You play hard to get, you're only going to wind up attracting people who love the chase, but don't enjoy the catch. But that's how this plays out in terms of intimate relationships, more often than not. Here, what we want to illustrate is that in the obsessional or masculine rendering, And in the hysterical or feminine rendering, what we see is the feminine subject crossed out in both cases, reduced from a whole being, you might say, to a part, that little overlapping objet a, the part that is used by the masculine subject to sustain a feeling of wholeness. I don't think we need to go much further than this. I think you fundamentally get what's being said here. I cue all this up, not because I'm trying to reinvent this fucking wheel, in this case, two wheels overlapping in a Euler way, but to remind you that relative to masculine subjects in pursuit of autonomy, the feminine subject remains on the fence, divided, with one foot in the phallic function, visible and accessible, but also one foot elsewhere. When the feminine subject allows his or herself to be what the other partner is taught to have, they find themselves with one foot in the phallic function and one foot somewhere else. The part of them that's in the phallic function is the represented A. The part of them that is not is the part that is X'd out. As objet A, object and cause of another's desire, the feminine subject participates in the phallic function. You see? But again, what about that other part of her in these Euler diagrams, the part that is X'd out in both edition? I've often talked about this in terms of a masculine either or undercut by a feminine both and. It's not a bad way to get started on this topic. Masculine subjects believe you're either a real man or not. You're either the uncut daddy or among his obedient sons, a tomcat or a motherfucking house cat. Feminine subjects, however, show that it's possible to be both, engaged with the sons and enjoying somewhere else, and sometimes both at once, inside and outside. That's another way to be a cat. Here in the first half of L'étourdi, we're invited to give this account a homo-hetero twist. You heard me riff on the homo, the tomo, sexuated structure of masculine fantasy. Notice where we go with this. If masculine enjoyment is fundamentally homosexual with two M's, and even tomosexual, spelled again with two M's, it's because it's structured atop fantasies of real men, somewhere, somehow, enjoying without restraint, beyond all limits, etc. On the feminine side of things, however, it's all about the heteros. Not the homo, but the heteros, as Lacan puts it on page 53 of our text. A heteros which he says cannot be slaked or stoppered by a universe. Allow me to be precise here. The universe of all men, established and maintained by the fantasy figure of no man, finds no equivalent in the field of femininity. Men need to hear what women can do without. Daddy. Which doesn't mean she won't say it, just that it's not the only fucking word she knows, and certainly not the only one she has ears to hear. What does it mean to love this about your partner? To love this about your partner, whether they are a man or a woman, is to love them just like a woman, not as a part to help you feel whole, but as an other apart from any such pursuit. A figure of radical alterity, not sameness, whose relation to you can only be differential. In short, heteros. And again, that doesn't have anything to do with what's behind your swimsuit zone. Check out, for instance, page 53 of our readings. I think if you're messing around, I'm not even going to get into the French. This thing's been published multiple places. The version of the text that we're looking at puts us on page 53. I'll let you track down the original French in other écrits if that's what you want, or if you want to go back to the original journal publication, you certainly can. Here, what I'm going to give you is Gallagher's translation of a key passage that emphasizes what it means to love the heteros. Let us call heterosexual, by definition, one who loves women, whatever may be his or her own sex. This will be clearer, Lacan says. I said to love, not being engaged to them by a relationship that is not there. Heterosexual means to love women regardless of your sex, and I would say theirs as well, because it's about feminine enjoyment. And the emphasis here, Lacan says, is on love, not being engaged with these partners by a relationship that's not there. You know what I'm talking about? A sexual relationship that is not there. Do I digress yet again and again on the theme of love? You damn right I do. And for the very same reason, to walk away from the dream of a sexual relationship, and in so doing to sidestep the masculine pursuit of wholeness by way of others, but only ever in service to oneself. That's the dilemma. Heteronomy in service to autonomy. That's a bit of a problem there. But let me be clear, precise, and as accessible as possible when it comes to this shit. Fuck autonomy. I'm here to help you redeem the heteronymous. Love is about being there with others, in differential relation with them and their lack, a lack which is not your own. And not once and for all, but again and again. The key word here again is encore. So when Lacan writes in L'Étourdi that it's the logic of the heteros that we must get going, rest assured, this is how I read him, right or wrong. The logic of the heteros needs to become the operational logic of love. And it's on the side of feminine enjoyment, at once a part of and a part from the phallic function, that I find occasion to pursue this. Here, with hers, we find the logic of the heteros. And it's precisely this logic whose operativity we now need to formulate. Yet another reason why I queued up those well-worn Euler diagrams of the obsessive and the hysteric. Woman is here and there, in and out, phallic and beyond, with one foot in logics of castration and one foot elsewhere in both diagrams. We heard in our last series following Lacan of a jouissance, jouissance. This is the part of feminine enjoyment that shows up in the phallic function, accessible to the masculine figure, but also accessible to others as well. This is the part of her enjoyment that can be said. But there's also this notion of jouissance, and that is where we see in these Euler diagrams the part of femininity X'd out that cannot be said, cannot show up. This is jouissance we learned in Seminar 19. You can go back and check out our lectures on this. My point is that we got a formula for these present and absent jouissances, In the first formula of feminine enjoyment that says there does not exist someone whose speech, action, and enjoyment negates the phallic function, we see jouissance, that is present and accessible. However, in the second formula of feminine subjectivity that says not all of her enjoyment is subordinate to the phallic function, we see jouissance, a mode of enjoyment that is X'd out relative to the field of the symbolic. To end this lecture, I'd like to start with that first formula, the one that says there does not exist anyone who naysays the phallic function. In becoming the part that promises to make men whole, women inadvertently prove that there is not anyone in either camp, masculine or feminine, whose enjoyment negates the phallic function. Part-whole dialectics are integral, not disruptive to phallic enjoyment. So if men are 100% castrated and women are 1 to 99% castrated, as I've argued in recent series, where can we find someone who's 0% castrated? Nowhere, because those motherfuckers don't exist. Technically speaking, their existence is impossible. Men, of course, disagree. They think it's possible to naysay and thus to negate the phallic function. So which is it? Has anyone ever said no to the phallic function? Men wager so, with their nia, N-I-A. And women say no, with their nia, N-Y-A. Now, rather than choose between these two nias, one masculine and one feminine, notice them together, because that's exactly how Lacan presents them to us, nia. Masculine subjects claim that there exists someone to naysay the phallic function. But note, in so claiming, they do not themselves naysay the phallic function. Just the opposite, in fact. They prove by their fact and act of speaking that all men are subject to the phallic function. If the father they dream about is no man, and ultimately a phantasmatic no man, they themselves, they're all yes men. They affirm what he denies. Feminine subjects, on the other hand, say no. And I would say not enough. Their nia negates or naysays the masculine affirmation of the father's supposed negation of the phallic function. Now that's a mouthful, so I'll say it again. Their nia, N-Y-A, negates or naysays the masculine affirmation of the father's supposed negation of the phallic function. Women naysay the masculine insistence on the existence of a naysayer relative to the phallic function. And note the fucking glorious irony in all of this. What the masculine nia fails to produce, the feminine nia embodies in full. An actual saying no. The same saying no, that's not it, that the act and fact of speaking, midway between barred subjectivity and symptomatic statement, learned from its ultimate sensei, the real. This is why it's not until after he's presented his two formulas of feminine enjoyment, just after, in fact, that Lacan tells us that the sense of the act of speaking is nia. That bit that we began with, nia, check it out. It comes right after Lacan says, and here are the feminine formulas of sexuation. That is crucial and not coincidental. By calling bullshit, nia, spelled N-Y-A, on the unsubstantiated masculine claim that there once existed and may someday, somehow, some way exist again, someone whose denial operates on the phallic function. Here's that other nia, spelled N-I-A. Feminine subjectivity pulls the plug on masculine enjoyment. By calling bullshit on this homoerotic masculine fantasy, feminine subjectivity pulls the plug on masculinity itself. She removes the stopper that allowed the collection of all men to remain watertight, all-inclusive, a universe without remainder. In other words, she removes the extimate limit condition of masculinity itself when she naysays their insistence on the existence of a naysayer relative to the phallic function. No exceptional real man, no totalizing set of all men in which enjoyment can only be experienced as phallic. That is the result of this. When feminine subjects pull the plug on the masculine fantasy of an exceptional real man, they also drain the category of all men, and with it, the idea that enjoyment can only be experienced as phallic. That is what is at stake here. Because if you don't have an exceptional real man who limits, controls, and contains, creates, and establishes this totalizing set of all men, the dam is broke. And all the men come washing down. You've heard sometimes that it's raining men. This is quite a bit more of a torrent than that. Hear me now. Where a homosexuated universe of enjoyment was, we now have a heterosexuated multiverse of enjoyment. Where the masculine, homosexuated universe of enjoyment was, insisting that all enjoyments had to be phallic, a heterosexuated, thoroughly feminine, multiverse of enjoyment becomes. I want to illustrate this for you with some good passages. It's from the readings that ostensibly relate to what we're doing here. It's on page 49. That's where the good stuff starts. We're still working in the first half of Ph.D. You can check it out. If you're looking at the French in other écrits, it looks like it's going to begin right at the top of page 466. But don't quote me on that shit. I'm working with the version we got in front of us. I want to illustrate what it is I'm getting at here with this shift from a homosexuated universe of enjoyment as only phallic to a heterosexuated multiverse of enjoyment that doesn't have to only be phallic. With a passage. Here's the one I like best. It's at the bottom of page 49, extending up to page 50. It is, Lacan says, that by introducing as moiety, this other half, those called women, the subject is determined by the fact that, not existing as being suspended on the phallic function, everything here can be said about it, even if it proceeds from unreason. But it is an all outside universe, which is read right away from the second quantifier as not all. So Lacan is saying that when the first formula of feminine subjectivity, by canceling out the myth of the father, cracks open the previously watertight category of all men enjoying according to the phallic function, when this shit happens, the second formula of feminine enjoyment becomes relevant. Why? Because now we see that not all of one's enjoyment need be phallic. That's what he means by this. Reading on. The subject in the moiety, or the half, where it is determined by denied quantifiers, arises from the fact that nothing existent creates a limit to the function that would not be able to secure for itself anything whatsoever from a universe. Thus, even basing oneself on this moiety, they, and notice the French here, we'll come back to it in a second, are not alls, with the consequence and by the very fact that none of them is all either. Now, this French bit is relevant. Here, as one of the translators in our version notes, Lacan uses the feminine plural subject pronoun here, with no referent nearby to justify it. And according to the translator, it appears that he is referring to those subjects who are classed as feminine in the table of sexuation without reference to gender. Lacan's French here, in other words, is opening up the field and the function of feminine subjectivity to men, as well as women, as it were. And all this bit about denied quantifiers, the quantifiers in question are the first variables in Lacan's formulas of sexuation, and to deny them is to put a line over the top of them. And that's precisely what you see in both of the quantifiers at work in Lacan's formulas of feminine subjectivity. They are denied quantifiers because there's a line over the top of each of them. So don't get too lost in this passage. Just read it again, and study it in light of what I've said. Where a homosexuated universe of enjoyment was, requiring that all enjoyment be phallic, we now see a heterosexuated multiverse of enjoyment in which not all enjoyment has to be phallic. In the act and fact of speaking, which all that is said cannot do without, you'll recall, men and women alike are not entirely subordinate to the phallic function. You want a conclusion? Here it is. In the act and fact of speaking, men and women alike are not entirely subordinate to the phallic function. By the sheer fact that we speak, my friends, not all of our enjoyment is phallic. Some of it, yes, but not all of it. What then, in all of this, does nia say no to? That's the sense of speaking in question here, and speaking says no. What does it say no to? Not to the phallic function, but to its universality. That is absolutely crucial here. What nia says no to, what the act of speaking says no to, when it is engaged in by men and women alike, it's not the phallic function. It says no to the presumed universality of the phallic function, the belief that all enjoyment has to be and can only be phallic. That is what nia, the sense of speaking, says no to. Nia says no. That's not all enjoyment amounts to. That's not the only way to enjoy. There is no one way to enjoy. You want to know what nia means? It means there is no one way to enjoy. If we learn this from the act of speaking, and the latter learned this from the real, it's by way of the analytic discourse, the one with which we began, that we learn all of this about the relationship between the real, the act of speaking, and its demonstration of the fact that not all of our enjoyment need be phallic. And you need only recall the diagram work we've done so far in this series on L'Étourdi to see what connects all of this. The real, the act of speaking, and the fact that not all of our enjoyments have to be phallic, they all pivot on logics of existence, X-sistence. The real exists truth. The act of speaking exists what is said, and the not all at stake in human enjoyment for men and women alike. It exists the very thing that it also refuses to negate, the phallic function.